Have you ever wondered what would happen if someone tested your true intentions without you knowing? In today's story, a wealthy man hides his identity to see if the woman he's falling for truly cares about him or his money. But what he discovers will leave you speechless. This is a tale of love, trust, and the unexpected twists that life throws our way. Stay tuned, because you won't want to miss how this story unfolds. Ryan Carter sat at the edge of his king-sized bed, staring out at the sprawling city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. The morning sun bathed the room in a soft, golden light, but it did little to warm the emptiness he felt inside. His home was a masterpiece of modern design, sleek furniture, minimalist decor, and every luxury money could buy. Yet it all felt hollow. In his mind, as the founder of a thriving, eco-friendly construction company, Ryan had built a life most people could only dream of. His projects were celebrated for their innovation, and his name was synonymous with success. But behind the accolades and wealth, Ryan carried a heavy burden: loneliness. Years of betrayal had left him guarded, business partners had stolen from him, and an ex-girlfriend had seen him as nothing more than a walking bank account. Over time, he'd learned to keep people at arm's length, trusting no one with his heart. That morning, as he sipped his coffee, Ryan scrolled through his phone, skimming emails about new deals and upcoming meetings. But instead of heading straight to his office, he felt a pull to go somewhere else. A small bakery cafe he'd stumbled upon a few weeks ago. The Heart and Hearth Cafe wasn't the kind of place Ryan usually visited. It was tucked away in a quiet corner of town, far from the high-rise buildings and corporate boardrooms he was used to. The cafe had a charm that felt almost out of place in today's fast-paced world. The smell of freshly baked bread and pastries greeted customers at the door, and the walls were lined with handwritten notes of gratitude from the community. And then there was Leila Hart, the cafe's owner. She wasn't like anyone Ryan had met before. With her warm smile and genuine kindness, Leila had a way of making everyone feel welcome. She didn't know who Ryan really was, and for once, he liked it that way. Little did Ryan know, this small cafe and the woman who ran it would soon change his life forever. The Heart and Hearth Cafe was the kind of place that felt like home the moment you walked in. The scent of cinnamon rolls baking in the oven mingled with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow on the mismatched wooden tables and chairs. A small chalkboard near the counter displayed the day's specials in cheerful handwriting, and the faint hum of soft acoustic music played in the background. Leila Hart moved gracefully behind the counter, her apron dusted with flour and her hair tied back in a loose bun. She greeted every customer with the same genuine warmth, whether it was a regular who came in every morning for a croissant or a first-time visitor who looked a little lost. For Leila, the cafe wasn't just a business. It was her way of giving back to the community that had shaped her. In addition to running the cafe, Leila organized free cooking classes for struggling families in the area. Every week, she opened her kitchen to teach parents how to prepare affordable, healthy meals for their children. It wasn't easy between the rising cost of ingredients and the cafe's modest earnings. Leila often dipped into her own savings to keep the classes going. But she never complained. Helping others was her passion, and she believed in the power of food to bring people together. Ryan Carter had first stumbled upon the cafe by accident. He'd been driving through the quieter part of town, trying to clear his head after a particularly stressful meeting, when the sight of the quaint little bakery caught his eye. Something about it had drawn him in, and before he knew it, he was sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee and a slice of Leila's famous apple pie. At first, Ryan had kept to himself, observing the cafe's lively atmosphere from a distance. He watched as Leila moved from table to table, chatting with customers and making everyone feel like they belonged. There was something about her that intrigued him. Her kindness felt effortless, her smile unforced. It was a stark contrast to the world Ryan was used to, where every interaction seemed to come with an ulterior motive. Over the next few weeks, Ryan found himself returning to the cafe more often. It became a quiet escape from his high-pressure life, a place where he could blend in and just be another customer. He and Lila began exchanging small talk, at first about the weather or the pastries. But gradually their conversations grew deeper. Lila told him about her cooking classes and the family she worked with, her eyes lighting up as she spoke about the joy of teaching a child to bake their first loaf of bread. Ryan, on the other hand, kept his own story vague. He told Lila he worked in construction, but he left out the part about being the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. He didn't want her to see him differently, to treat him the way so many others had once they learned about his wealth. For the first time in years, Ryan felt like he could just be himself, and he wasn't ready to give that up. But as Ryan spent more time at the cafe, he began to notice the cracks beneath its cheerful surface. The oven in the kitchen was old and unreliable, breaking down at the worst possible times. The chairs wobbled, the paint on the walls was peeling, and Lila often looked exhausted, though she tried to hide it. One evening, as he lingered after closing time, Ryan overheard Lila on the phone, her voice tight with worry. "I know, but I just need a little more time," she said, pacing behind the counter. "The cafe is doing okay, but the cooking classes, I can't let them go. The families depend on them." Ryan's chest tightened as he listened. He wanted to help, but he hesitated. If he offered money, would Lila see it as an act of kindness, or would she think he was trying to buy her trust? The thought of losing the fragile connection they'd built was enough to keep him silent for now. Ryan Carter had never been the type to linger, but at the Heart and Hearth Cafe, time seemed to slow down. Each visit felt like a small escape from the chaos of his corporate world. The cafe's warm atmosphere, the hum of quiet conversations, and the occasional laughter of customers created a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. But more than anything, it was Lila Hart who kept him coming back. Over the weeks, their conversations grew longer. Lila had a way of making people open up, though Ryan was careful not to reveal too much about himself. He told her about his love for architecture and how he'd always admired the craftsmanship of old buildings. Lila, in turn, shared stories about her childhood, growing up in a small town where her family had struggled to make ends meet. "I guess that's why I started the cooking classes," Lila said one afternoon as she wiped down the counter. "When I was a kid, there were times when we didn't have much to eat. My mom used to get so creative with what little we had. She'd make these amazing meals out of almost nothing. I want to teach other families how to do the same, how to make something special, even when times are tough." Ryan listened intently, his coffee growing cold in front of him. He admired Lila's passion and her selflessness. She wasn't just running a cafe, she was building a community, one meal at a time. But as much as Ryan enjoyed their growing connection, he couldn't ignore the nagging voice in the back of his mind. He was lying to her, or at least withholding the truth. Every time Lila asked about his work, he kept his answers vague. He told her he worked in construction, which wasn't a lie, but he left out the part about being the CEO of a company that had built some of the most innovative green buildings in the country. Ryan's hesitation wasn't just about protecting his identity, it was about protecting his heart. He'd been burned before by people who saw his wealth as an opportunity, not a part of who he was. With Lila, things felt different. She treated him like an ordinary person, and he didn't want to risk losing that. Still, the more time he spent at the cafe, the harder it became to ignore the signs of Lila's struggles. The oven in the kitchen broke down again, forcing her to close early one day. The chairs in the dining area wobbled dangerously, and the paint on the walls was faded and chipped. Lila brushed it off with a laugh, but Ryan could see the worry in her eyes. One evening, as the cafe was closing, Ryan stayed behind to help Lila stack the chairs. The two of them worked in comfortable silence, the soft glow of the overhead lights casting long shadows across the room. "You know," Ryan said, breaking the quiet, "you could probably get a grant or something for the cooking classes. There are organizations that support community programs like yours." Lila smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've looked into it," she said, setting a chair upside down on the table. "But most of those grants require matching funds, and I just don't have the extra money right now. The cafe barely covers its own expenses." Ryan hesitated, his hands tightening around the back of a chair. He wanted to tell her he could help, that he had the resources to fix everything. The oven, the chairs, the cooking classes, all of it. But the words caught in his throat. What if she thought he was trying to buy her trust? What if she saw him differently once she knew the truth? Instead, he said, "I'm sure you'll figure it out. You're resourceful." Leela laughed softly, shaking her head. "I hope so. The families who come to the classes, they've been through so much. I can't let them down." As Ryan walked home that night, the weight of his secret pressed heavily on his chest. He wanted to believe that Lila would understand, that she wouldn't judge him for hiding his wealth. But the fear of losing her trust kept him silent. Meanwhile, Layla's challenges continued to mount. The cafe's landlord had recently raised the rent, and the repairs to the kitchen equipment were becoming urgent. Layla tried to stay optimistic, but Ryan could see the strain in her smile. One afternoon, as he sat at his usual table, Ryan overheard a conversation between Lila and one of her regular customers. "I'm thinking of doing a fundraiser," Lila said, her voice tinged with both hope and uncertainty. "Maybe a bake sale or a community dinner. It won't cover everything, but it's a start." The customer nodded encouragingly, but Ryan could see the doubt flicker across Lila's face. She was trying so hard to hold everything together, and it broke his heart to see her struggling. That night, as Ryan lay awake in his penthouse, he couldn't stop thinking about Lila. He wanted to help her, to ease her burden, but he didn't know how to do it without risking the fragile connection they'd built. For the first time in years, Ryan felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel: vulnerability. The Heart and Hearth Cafe was busier than usual on a crisp Friday morning. The smell of freshly baked muffins filled the air, and the soft chatter of customers created a lively hum. But behind the counter, Lila Hart was distracted. She smiled and greeted customers as usual, but her mind was elsewhere. The cafe's landlord had sent her a notice earlier that week. The rent was increasing again, and the repairs to the kitchen equipment needed to be addressed immediately. If she didn't make the necessary updates, she risked losing her lease altogether. Lila had been trying to stay positive, but the weight of it all was starting to show. Ryan Carter noticed it too. He'd been sitting at his usual corner table, sipping his coffee and watching Lila as she worked. Her usual energy seemed dimmed, her smile a little forced. He wanted to ask her what was wrong, but he hesitated. He didn't want to pry, and he certainly didn't want to risk saying the wrong thing. Later that afternoon, as the cafe quieted down, Ryan finally worked up the courage to approach her. "Hey," he said, leaning casually against the counter. "You seem a little off today. Everything okay?" Lila looked up from the tray of cookies she was arranging, her expression softening at his concern. "Oh, it's nothing," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Just the usual stress of running a small business." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Doesn't seem like nothing." Leela hesitated, then sighed. It's the rent," she admitted, "and the kitchen equipment. The oven's been acting up again, and the landlord says I need to fix it or risk losing the lease. I'm trying to figure out how to make it all work, but it's a lot." Ryan's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her he could fix everything with a single phone call, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he said, "Have you thought about doing a fundraiser? Maybe the community could help out." Lila nodded. "I've been thinking about it. Maybe a bake sale or a dinner event. But even if it goes well, it probably won't be enough to cover everything." Ryan could see the worry in her eyes, and it made him feel helpless. He hated seeing her struggle, but he didn't know how to help without revealing the truth about who he was. That evening, as Ryan walked home, he couldn't stop thinking about Leela's situation. He knew she wouldn't ask for help, even if she desperately needed it. She was too proud, too independent. But the thought of her losing the cafe and the cooking classes she cared so much about was unbearable. The next day, Ryan returned to the cafe, determined to find a way to help. He stayed late, offering to help Lila clean up after closing. As they worked, he brought up the fundraiser idea again. "You know," he said, stacking chairs onto tables, If you do a community dinner, I could help out. I'm not much of a cook, but I could pitch in with the setup or something." Leela smiled, a genuine one this time. "That's sweet of you, Ryan. But I don't want to drag you into my mess. You've already been so supportive just by coming here all the time." "It's not a mess," Ryan said firmly. "It's your dream, and it's worth fighting for." Lila looked at him for a long moment, her expression softening. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means a lot." Despite her gratitude, Ryan could tell she was still worried. The fundraiser might help, but it wouldn't solve everything, and time was running out. A few days later, Lila officially announced the fundraiser, a community dinner at the cafe, with all proceeds going toward the repairs and the cooking classes. Flyers went up around town, and Lila threw herself into planning the event. Ryan offered to help wherever he could, but he still felt like it wasn't enough. As the date of the fundraiser approached, Ryan's internal conflict grew. He wanted to step in and save the day, but he was terrified of what Lila might think if she found out the truth. Would she see him as a friend who cared, or as someone who had been hiding behind a lie? The night of the fundraiser arrived and the cafe was packed. Families, friends, and regular customers filled the tables, enjoying the homemade dishes Leela and her small team had prepared. The atmosphere was warm and lively, but Ryan couldn't shake the feeling of unease. As the evening went on, Lila tallied up the donations. She smiled and thanked everyone for their generosity, but Ryan could see the disappointment in her eyes. The fundraiser had been a success, but it still wasn't enough to cover the repairs and the rent increase. After the last guest left, Ryan stayed behind to help Leela clean up. She tried to put on a brave face, but he could tell she was holding back tears. "It's okay," she said, her voice trembling. "We'll figure something out, we always do." Ryan wanted to believe her, but he knew the reality of the situation. The cafe and everything Lila had worked so hard to build was in serious jeopardy. That night, as Ryan lay awake in his penthouse, he made a decision. He couldn't stand by and watch Lila lose everything. It was time to tell her the truth, no matter the risk. The Heart and Hearth Cafe was quiet the next morning, the usual hum of activity replaced by an almost eerie stillness. Lila Hart stood behind the counter, staring at the empty tables as she absent-mindedly wiped down the countertop. The fundraiser had been a beautiful event, filled with laughter and support from the community, but the reality of the numbers weighed heavily on her. It wasn't enough. Ryan Carter walked in, his usual confident stride slowed by the weight of what he was about to do. He had spent the entire night wrestling with his decision, but he knew he couldn't keep the truth from Lila any longer. She deserved to know who he really was, even if it meant risking everything they had built between them. "Morning," Ryan said softly, his voice breaking the silence. Lila looked up and forced a smile. "Morning. Coffee?" "Actually, I was hoping we could talk," Ryan said, his tone serious. Lila hesitated, sensing the shift in his demeanor. "Sure," she said, setting down the cloth she'd been holding. "What's on your mind?" Ryan took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Lila, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Lila frowned, her brow furrowing in concern. "Okay, what is it?" Ryan hesitated, the words catching in his throat. He had spent weeks hiding this part of himself, afraid of how Lila might react. But now, looking into her kind, trusting eyes, he knew he couldn't keep it from her any longer. "I haven't been completely honest with you," he began. "When I told you I work in construction, that wasn't the whole truth. I do work in construction, but I own the company. I'm the CEO of Carter Green Developments." Lila blinked, the name clearly registering. "Carter Green Developments? The eco-building company? The one that's been in the news for all those sustainable skyscrapers?" Ryan nodded, his heart pounding. "Yeah, that's me." For a moment, Lila just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then she let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You're kidding, right?" "I'm not," Ryan said quietly. "I've been hiding it because Well, because I've been burned before. People have used me for my money, and I didn't want that to happen again. I didn't want you to see me differently. Layla's smile faded, replaced by a look of hurt and confusion. So, all this time you've been lying to me? It wasn't a lie, Ryan said quickly. I just didn't tell you everything. I didn't want my money to get in the way of what we have. But we have, Leela repeated, her voice rising. Ryan, I trusted you. I told you about my struggles, about how hard I've been working to keep this place afloat, and you just sat there, knowing you could have helped me the whole time? Ryan flinched at the accusation in her tone. I didn't want to make you feel like a charity case, he said. I didn't want to ruin what we've built. What we've built? Lila said again, shaking her head. Ryan, you've been sitting here, watching me struggle, watching me pour everything I have into this cafe and those cooking classes, and you didn't think I deserved to know the truth? I was scared, Ryan admitted, his voice breaking. I was scared that if you knew, you'd see me differently, that you'd think I was just some rich guy trying to throw money at your problems. Lila crossed her arms, her expression hardening. You don't get it, do you? It's not about the money, Ryan, it's about trust. You didn't trust me enough to be honest with me, and now I don't know if I can trust you. Ryan felt his chest tighten, the weight of her words hitting him like a punch to the gut. Lila, I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know how to tell you. Lila looked away, her jaw tightening as she fought back tears. I need some time, she said finally. I need to figure out how I feel about all of this. Ryan nodded, his heart sinking. I understand, he said. But please, just know that I care about you, and I care about this place. I want to help, Lila. I want to make things right. Lila didn't respond. She turned and walked into the kitchen, leaving Ryan standing alone in the empty cafe. As he left, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that he had just lost something precious. He had spent so long protecting himself from being hurt that he hadn't realized he was hurting someone else in the process. That night, as he sat in his penthouse, Ryan made a decision. He couldn't undo the past, but he could still try to make things right. He would help Leela save the cafe, whether she forgave him or not. The days following Ryan's confession were some of the longest of his life. He stayed away from the cafe, giving Leela the space she had asked for, but it was agonizing not knowing where they stood. He replayed their conversation over and over in his mind, wishing he had handled things differently. Meanwhile, Leela threw herself into her work, trying to distract herself from the whirlwind of emotions Ryan's revelation had stirred up. She felt betrayed, but she also couldn't ignore the sincerity in his voice when he apologized. He had lied, yes, but his reasons weren't malicious. Still, the trust between them had been fractured, and Leela wasn't sure if it could be repaired. The cafe's struggles, however, didn't wait for her to sort out her feelings. The oven broke down completely, forcing her to close for 2 days while she scrambled to find a repairman. The landlord sent another notice, reminding her that the rent increase was due at the end of the month. Leela was running out of time, and the stress was beginning to take its toll. One evening, as she sat alone in the cafe going over the numbers for the 100th time, the door opened. Leela looked up, expecting a late customer, but instead, she saw Ryan standing there, holding a folder in his hands. Ryan, she said, her voice a mix of surprise and exhaustion. What are you doing here? I know you said you needed time, Ryan began, stepping inside, but I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. I want to help, Leela. Please, just hear me out. Leela hesitated, her instinct to send him away warring with her curiosity. Finally, she sighed and gestured for him to sit. Fine, I'm listening. Ryan sat across from her, placing the folder on the table. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, he began. You're right, I should have been honest with you from the start. I was scared, but that doesn't excuse what I did. I know I broke your trust and I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I care about you, Leela, and I care about this cafe. I want to help you save it. Leela crossed her arms, her expression guarded. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Ryan opened the folder, revealing a detailed proposal. I've been working on this for the past few days. It's a plan to renovate the cafe and expand the cooking classes. I've already spoken to a few people in my company, and they're willing to donate the materials and labor to fix the kitchen and update the dining area. We can also set up a grant program to fund the cooking classes for the next 2 years. Lila stared at the papers in front of her, her mind racing. The proposal was thorough, professional, and exactly what the cafe needed. But it also felt overwhelming. Ryan, she said slowly, this is a lot. I don't know if I can accept this. It's not charity, Ryan said quickly. Think of it as an investment. You've built something incredible here, Lila. This cafe isn't just a business, it's a lifeline for this community. I want to help you keep it going, not just for now, but for the future. Lila looked at him, her emotions swirling. She wanted to believe him, to trust that his intentions were genuine, but a part of her still felt wary. And what do you get out of this? She asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. Ryan met her gaze, his expression earnest. I get to see you succeed. I get to know that I did something good for someone I care about. That's all I want, Lila. No strings attached. For a long moment, Lila said nothing. She studied Ryan's face, searching for any hint of insincerity, but all she saw was a man who genuinely wanted to help. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. Okay, she said quietly. I'll think about it. Ryan nodded, relief washing over him. That's all I'm asking. Take your time, and if you have any questions or concerns, just let me know. As Ryan left the cafe that night, Lila felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. She wasn't ready to forgive him completely, but she couldn't deny that his proposal could save the cafe. Over the next few days, Lila reviewed the plan in detail. She consulted with a few trusted friends and even reached out to some of the families who attended her cooking classes. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Everyone agreed that the renovations and funding could make a huge difference. When Ryan returned a week later, Lila was ready to give him her answer. I've decided to accept your help, she said, her voice steady. But I need you to understand something. This doesn't mean everything is okay between us. It's going to take time for me to trust you again. I understand, Ryan said, his tone serious, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn that trust back. With that, the two of them began working together to bring the plan to life. Ryan's team moved quickly, repairing the kitchen and updating the dining area in record time. The cafe reopened with a fresh new look, and the cooking classes expanded to include more families than ever before. Through it all, Ryan kept his distance, respecting Lila's boundaries and letting her take the lead. Slowly but surely, the walls between them began to come down. Lila saw the effort Ryan was putting in, not just for the cafe, but for her. One evening, as they stood in the newly renovated kitchen, Lila turned to Ryan and said, "Thank you for everything." Ryan smiled, his heart swelling with hope. "You don't have to thank me, Lila. I'm just glad I could help." And for the first time in weeks, Lila smiled back. The Heart and Hearth Cafe was alive again. The once faded walls now gleamed with a fresh coat of paint, the wobbly chairs had been replaced with sturdy, handcrafted ones, and the kitchen was equipped with state-of-the-art appliances. The cafe felt like a new beginning, not just for the business, but for Lila Hart herself. The community had rallied around the cafe's reopening, and the turnout was overwhelming. Families who had attended her cooking classes brought homemade dishes to share. Regular customers filled the tables, and even new faces stopped by to see what all the excitement was about. Lila moved through the crowd, greeting everyone with a smile that, for the first time in weeks, felt genuine. Ryan Carter stood off to the side, watching Lila with quiet admiration. He had kept his promise to give her space, stepping back and letting her take the spotlight. Seeing her so happy, so full of life, made every sleepless night and moment of doubt worth it. As the evening wound down and the last of the customers trickled out, Lila found Ryan sitting at his usual table, nursing a cup of coffee. She hesitated for a moment before walking over and sitting across from him. "A busy night," she said, her tone light but sincere. Ryan smiled. "It was amazing. You've built something really special here, Lila." Leela looked down at her hands, tracing the edge of the table with her finger. "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted. "The renovations, the funding for the classes, it's more than I ever could have imagined." "You did the hard part," Ryan said. "I just gave you the tools. This place is a reflection of you. Your passion, your kindness, your determination. That's what makes it special." Lila met his gaze, her expression softening. "You know, when you first told me the truth, I was so angry. I felt like you'd betrayed me, like everything we'd built was a lie. But now, I think I understand why you did it. You were scared, just like I was." Ryan nodded, his throat tightening. "I was. I've spent so much of my life hiding behind my money, afraid that people would only see the dollar signs and not the person. But with you, it was different. You made me feel normal, like I could just be myself." Lila smiled faintly. "You are more than your money, Ryan. I see that now. And I think, deep down, I always did. I just needed time to process everything." Ryan leaned forward, his voice gentle. "And now?" Leela took a deep breath, her eyes searching his. "Now, I think I'm ready to move forward. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm willing to try, if you are." Ryan's heart swelled with hope. "I am," he said without hesitation. "Whatever it takes, Lila, I'm here." The two of them sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of the past few weeks finally lifting. There was still work to be done, still trust to rebuild, but for the first time they both felt like they were on the same page. In the weeks that followed, Ryan and Lila found a new rhythm. Ryan continued to support the cafe and the cooking classes, but he made a conscious effort to let Lila take the lead. He wanted her to know that he believed in her, that he saw her as an equal partner, not someone who needed saving. Lila, in turn, began to let her guard down. She saw the way Ryan interacted with the families who attended her classes, how he listened to their stories and offered encouragement. He wasn't just a wealthy businessman, he was someone who genuinely cared about making a difference. One evening, after a particularly successful cooking class, Lila and Ryan found themselves alone in the cafe. The tables were cleared, the lights were dimmed, and the air was filled with the lingering scent of fresh bread and spices. "Thank you for staying to help clean up," Lila said, handing Ryan a dish towel. "Any time," Ryan replied, drying a plate. "I think I'm getting pretty good at this." Lila laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "You're not bad. Maybe I'll hire you as my assistant." Ryan grinned. "I'd work for free." Lila rolled her eyes, but her smile didn't fade. "You know, I've been thinking about expanding the classes, maybe offering a program for kids, teaching them how to cook simple, healthy meals. What do you think?" "I think it's a great idea," Ryan said. "You've already made such a big impact on this community. This would just take it to the next level." Leela's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I'm glad you think so. I was worried it might be too much." "Nothing's too much when it comes to your dreams," Ryan said softly. Leela looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone. As they finished cleaning up, Ryan walked Lila to the door. The night air was cool and crisp, and the stars twinkled above them. "Good night, Lila," Ryan said, his voice warm. "Good night, Ryan," Lila replied, her smile lingering as she watched him walk away. As she locked up the cafe and headed home, Lila felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in months. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, she felt like she wasn't facing it alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Thank you so much for watching this story on Emma Stories. If you enjoyed it and want to see more heartwarming tales like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us keep sharing these meaningful stories with you. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What part of this story touched you the most? And as always, stay tuned for more inspiring content right here on Emma's Stories. See you in the next video.